Okay, so we're up to Siman Ayin Reish Beis Seif Ches. Says the Mechaber, Mekadshin an Yayin Mevushel. You're allowed to make Kiddush on cooked wine, Val Yayin Sheyesh Bedvash, and wine that has honey in it. V'yesh Eimrim She'ein Mekadshim Aleim. There are those who say that you can't make Kiddush on this. V'amin Lekadish Allah, says the Ramah, Afilu Yesh Leyayin Acher. So the minhag is that you can make Kiddush on cooked wine and on wine with honey. Even if you have other wine, it's just not as good as the cooked wine. Or wine with honey. Says the Mishnah Berurah, so the first opinion says you can make Kiddush on wine which is cooked or wine with honey is because it hasn't changed so much, it hasn't deteriorated so badly. The that it has changed. And they say that this second opinion, which says you can't make Kiddush on it, is because you can't even make a ber pragofen on it, because you make a shahakal. This is a different type of drink. And by the way, in footnote 17, he talks about pasteurized wine. This is what we're talking about here is a certain cooked wine where there's two different opinions, and the Ramah says you can. However, he says in footnote 17, which is sort of pasteurized, is pasteurized wine. Then for sure you make a ber pragofen. It hasn't changed its taste, and it hasn't sort of boiled away and the volume has gone down. Is this pasteurized wine so pasteurized wine is not considered mevushel, says Rabbi Yashav, in terms of the Isser of Yain, which is Noga by Nochri. Okay, so Sheyesh Bedvash, says the Mishnah Berurah, you've got in Chof, Kain Konditon. I remember as kids we used to have this wine at home. It was called Konditon. It was a very sweet wine, a very nice wine. I don't know if you can still get it. Shenasim Yain with Vasha Palpulin, which is made out of honey and pepper. And even if it changes its taste and its smell. Even if the Rambam says you put a bit of honey in it, then it's no longer considered proper wine, and it's like another sort of sweet syrupy type of drink, and you make a shahakal. Some people, they put honey or sugar in their wine. You should be machmir if you can, to try and avoid making kiddush on that. And the Ramah concludes, however, that the minhag is to make kiddush on it. Says Mishnah Berurah of Beis Valkein mutar levashel hatzimukin. You're allowed, therefore, to cook raisins or sanin hayayin and to drain off the wine. Or lekadesh olav, make kiddush on that. V'yesh machmirin delonik kriyan that she had toises shleish yomim. It's got to ferment for 3 days. Acha bishul hatzimukin, after you've cooked the raisins. She'ena toiv. If you've got wine which is the same, regular wine, and this cooked or honey wine, it's better to avoid the cooked wine and the honey wine and to use the regular wine. But in bracha, and regarding a bracha, and that you do make a ber pragofen. Okay, so therefore there you have it, cooked wine and honey wine, two opinions in the Mechaber, whether or not you can make Kiddush, and the Ramah says the minhag is to make Kiddush on it. Okay, Tess. B'makom she'en yain motzu. Now what happens if you haven't got wine? Yesh omrim shemekadshin al sheichar. You make Kiddush on a strong drink, on a beer or things like that, or shah mashkin, and other liquids, chutz min hamayim, apart from water. V'yesh omrim she'en mekadshim. Ulaharash, B'layla, this is what we do, and this is what we're familiar with. B'layla lo yekadesh el ha-sheikha el ha-pas. If you haven't got wine on Friday night, you don't go to Chamar Medina, but rather you make Kiddush on bread. Of Aboiker, and on Shabbos morning, Yosef lekadesh al ha-sheichar. It's better if you haven't got wine to make it on Chamar Medina, and she'yivarech alav shehakol. Koydem birchas hamoitzi. Why? Because the whole nusach of Kiddush is really on Friday night. For most people, they make Kiddush, it's just ber pragofen. And therefore, if you were to do that on Pas, in a situation where you haven't got wine, then ein kan shum shinui. You're just having lunch. You're just making hamoitzi on your challah, on your bread, and therefore no one will really realize that you're making Kiddush. V'divrei tamim, says the Mechaber. And therefore, says the Rosh, what you do is on Friday night, if you haven't got wine, you make it on the challah, because you've got the whole nusach, you've got the whole nusach of Kiddush, and therefore it's clear that you're making Kiddush. Masha'enkin, on Shabbos morning, you make it on sheicha, because were you to make it on bread, there wouldn't be any shinui that this is anything particularly significant. Says the Ramah, v'chein haminik pasha k'divrei harosh, that's what we do. V'im yayin be'ir, lo yikadish ala pas. If you've got wine in the city, you shouldn't make Kiddush on bread. Misha eina sheisa yayin mishum neder, and a person who doesn't drink wine because he made a neder not to drink wine, yachol lekadish alav, you can make Kiddush on it. V'yishtu acherim hamasubin imay, and then other people will drink it, and that hasn't violated your neder because you're not drinking. V'im ein acherim imay, and if there's no one else around, and you've got a problem because you've made a neder not to drink wine, and what are you going to do? So then you kaddish ala pas v'lo yayin, and then Shabbos morning, you've got no choice, you can't make any wine, so therefore you kaddish ala pas v'lo ala yayin, oy yishma kiddush me'acherim, or to hear kiddush from somebody else. Says the brackets, hagos maimini perik chavtes to mechzi acher yayin, or tshuvas maimini yisoif haflosim, and dalav yikaddish ala pas l'chein tzarech le ma'achilukim eichel levad meichel acherim. On one hand it says mechazach yayin, you run after wine, and then it says yikaddish ala pas. How do you reconcile that? Well, if you're eating alone, then you've got to do it on bread. If you're eating with others, you make kiddush and other people will be able to drink the wine. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Chaf Dalet. So the Mechaber said that if you haven't got any bread, Mekadshin al ha-sheichar, v'davka b'makom tavi chamar medina. We're talking about a place where this sheichar is the chamar medina. Dahainu she'en yain motzu b'chol ha'er. There's no wine in town, b'shona hazu, in this year. V'ikesh diyasan hu misheichar, or shamashkin, and therefore people are drinking not wine because it's not around, but they're drinking chamar medina, sheichar, or other things. If there is wine, it's just really expensive. Mikri motzui is called motzui, and therefore you should go for that. If you haven't got kosher wine, motzui afal pi she'ein she'yain em yudim motzui, but even though there's non-Jewish wine around, lo mikri motzui alidei, it's not called motzui. Or shamashkin, the chofhei. Milk and oil is not really called shamashkin. You can't make kiddush on that. So chamar medina, it's not a drink that you would offer guests. The ein regilin l'shteisel l'mashke, it's not something which you would regularly drink. Or mashe kosav chutz min hamayim, when it says that these drinks apart from water, then it's lav dafka rotz lemem afim shtias kol mokem hahu rak mayim afilu hochi ein dina likrosa chamar medina l'dezeh. The reason why, of course, other things you can't make kiddush on, cholov and shemen, for example, he just mentioned. The reason why he specifies wine is that even if everyone drank water, he specifies water. Even if everyone drank water, that doesn't become chamar medina. You can never make kiddush on just water. Okay, with regard to that, we'll come to. Chutz min hamayim, ayin lekaman b'simin reish tzadivov, sif beis v'asher kasav nesham Mishnah Berurah. Okay, now then you come to the Rosh. The Rosh says that Friday night you make kiddush on pas, and on Shabbos morning you make on chamar medina. Says the Mishnah Berurah of Zayin, gam harosh sfir leik hayeshem harishin, ela kiven sha'pas bo l'tzorech suda Shabbos. However, since the bread is coming because of the Suda Shabbos, choshev tfei misheicha lekadish bo b'layla, we prefer making kiddush on Friday night on that bread, on the challah. Therefore, on Friday night, you should really avoid making kiddush on anything other than wine. If there's no wine. So the order is, first you make it on wine, then you make it on pas. There are many who say you can't even be yotze with pas. But like the Ramah says, this is what we follow. Ala pas. How do you do it? How do you make kiddush on bread? We've discussed this before. But you sort of put your hands. You haven't got a becher. You're making it on the bread. You put your hands on the challahs, ala pas. Until the end of Kiddush. Commercial cost of Simon Tov Pei Gimel. V'atam the commercial tzorech lecho is biyoda hakoshel Kiddush. Kein tzorech lecho is apas biyodei kishem mekadesh lapas. You actually have to hold the bread when you make Kiddush on the bread. Tov lekadesh choftes. Tov lekadesh. Yes. So this is the Mechaber saying that on Friday night it's better to make it on pas, and in the morning you make it on sheichar, on chamar medina. Says the Mishnah Berurah of Tes, Hainu, the bezehu yoyse tov melapas. This is better than bread. Kamishim mefarish hatam. Avil yain b'mokum shel motzui vada yevarich olov afilu bayoim. If you have got wine, it's certainly better to make it on wine in the daytime kiddush. U'kudemuch b'simen reish page tes sif beis. Umikol mokum b'dinoseinu shayayin b'yoyke. In our countries, says the Mishnah Berurah, writing, Eastern Europe in the circa early 20th century, where wine is expensive, and most people are drinking vodka and liqueurs and whiskey or whatever other things. Lo naga v'lagdoim lahadach hayayim b'yoyim sha'kiddush shel yoyim rak midrabon lekula alma v'soimchin atzman al divra makinim bezeh. And that's why perhaps it's become very prevalent, to make it on liquor and schnapps and things like that. Wine is very expensive, and it was very much a chamar medina to have other alcohols. However, making kiddush on wine in the daytime is certainly mitzvah min hamufcha. Okay, al sheichar v'im chaviv lo yain sarf. If a person enjoys other types of liquors or other drinks, yochel lekaddish lo b'yom lechatchil medinasenu shu chamar medina. Okay, you're feeling good, Charlie? Yeah. Ach she'izoy likach kais machazik revius, but you got to make sure you got to have a big kais, right? That's your problem. Or not. Yeah, you got to have a case which is holding revius. For lishleis mimenu mole lugmov, and to drink a good, a cheekful, shall rove revius. But the evet b'shas atchak she'eni yochel lishleis mole lugmov ein lo yain shamashkin afilu shtia kol hamasub mistarfin mole lugmov. If everyone has a sip and together it becomes a mole lugmov, then but the evet that counts. Uchadil el siman reish ayvov sifidalet. Or even meidvash shamashkin ay mashik kasavnu lekamon siman reish sadivov mishnebura. Shahakol lamed aleph. Obezu abrocha shel moisif kaidim hasuda who heka shul lekavod Shabbos masha'enke. So you're making a shahakol on the thing. That's clear that you're doing it l'shem Shabbos. You're making kiddush on Shabbos morning on a chamar medina. It's clear you're doing it for kiddush purposes. Masha'enke mivarech ala pas ein kan heka klal. It's not so clear. Shai b'boike ein orim nusach hakiddush. In the morning you don't say the whole nusach of the kiddush. Lo yikadosh ala pas kadei lochush l'das rabbeinu tam shesoved ein mekadsh ala pas klal. V'dat afilu la rosh v'yes ha-poskim. Even according to those opinions which say on Friday night you can make kiddush on bread, if you've got wine, you should certainly try and do that. If a person prefers bread, doesn't like drinking wine, then he can make it on bread. That's why some people make it on this. It's better not to make kiddush to get other people to drink. If they know how to make a bracha, let them make kiddush. Right? Which is a bit what we spoke about the other day, that if your daughters come down and you've made kiddush, let them make kiddush. Or they can make kiddush for themselves, and that's that. Okay, I think we better leave it there. Okay, let's say that.